I'm Nicholas. I'm 32 years old, and at my family's Thanksgiving dinner, I finally exposed the lie that had defined my entire life. Before I tell you about the moment a single audio file brought their perfect world crashing down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. The air in my parents' dining room was thick enough to carve with the turkey knife my father was wielding. It was the same scene every year. The polished silver, the white tablecloth that only came out for holidays, the scent of roasting turkey and my mother's overpowering perfume. From the outside, it was a perfect picture of an American family. But on the inside, it was a battlefield of unspoken tensions, and I had been a silent casualty for 3 decades. My brother, Leo, sat across from me, basking in the glow of my mother's adoration. His new fiancée, Amelia, was glued to his side, laughing at a story he was telling about closing a major deal at his finance firm. Every eye was on him. It was always on him. I took a slow sip of wine, the liquid doing little to calm the storm brewing in my chest. I had been practicing this moment in my head for weeks. I had the evidence in my pocket, a small hard drive that felt heavier than a brick. Then it happened. My mother, Eleanor, tapped her wine glass with a fork, the sharp sound cutting through the chatter. A bright, artificial smile was plastered on her face. "Leo, darling," she began, her voice dripping with pride. "Your wedding in September was simply breathtaking, a true event. Everything was perfect." She glanced around the table, ensuring everyone was paying attention. Then her eyes landed on me. The smile tightened, becoming something sharper, something almost mocking. "So, Nicholas," she said, her voice loud enough for the entire room to hear, "when is yours? It's about time you settled down, don't you think?" A few polite chuckles rippled through the guests. My aunt, a family friend. My father, Richard, paused his carving for a fraction of a second, his knuckles white around the handle. Leo just smirked, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. The old me would have mumbled something non-committal, let the jab slide off me, and disappeared back into the wallpaper. But the old me was gone. He died 6 months ago, on a beautiful June day that my family had chosen to ignore. I set my fork down gently, the small clink echoing in the sudden quiet. I met my mother's gaze, my own voice steady and clear. "I already had mine," I said. 6 months ago." The air was sucked out of the room. The polite smiles vanished. My father's knife froze mid-slice. I let the silence hang there for a beat, letting the weight of it settle on them. Then I delivered the final blow. "You got invitations." Dead silence. My father was the first to break it, his voice a confused whisper. "Nicholas, what are you talking about? We never got them." And that was the lie I was waiting for. I reached into my coat pocket, my fingers closing around the evidence. But to understand the weight of that moment, to understand why their perfect world was about to shatter, we have to go back to the beginning. Growing up in the Sterling household was like living in a meticulously curated museum exhibit where my older brother, Leo, was the main attraction. And I was the little placard in the corner that no one ever bothered to read. My parents didn't just love symmetry in their home decor. They demanded it in their family narrative. Leo was the golden child, the sun around which our family universe revolved. I wasn't the black sheep. That would have required attention. I was just the shadow. I learned this lesson early. I was 10 years old and had just won the state-level science fair. My project, a small-scale model of a water filtration system, was something I had poured my heart and soul into for months. I came home clutching a giant blue ribbon and a small trophy, my chest puffed out with a pride that felt brand new. "Mom, Dad, look!" I yelled, bursting through the door. My mother was in the kitchen on the phone, coordinating volunteers for one of Leo's fundraisers. She glanced at my ribbon, offered a distracted smile and said, "That's nice, honey. Put it on the counter. We have to leave in 5 minutes for Leo's soccer game. It's the semifinals." My father was in the living room polishing Leo's cleats. He ruffled my hair. "Good job, son," he said, his eyes already on the clock. "Your brother's going to score the winning goal today. I can feel it." They went to the game. I stayed home, my trophy sitting on the kitchen counter, its gold finish looking dull under the fluorescent lights. That night, the entire dinner conversation was a play-by-play of Leo's almost goal, and how the referee was clearly biased. My science fair was never mentioned again. It wasn't malice. It was something worse. It was irrelevance. My achievements were footnotes in the grand novel of Leo's life. This pattern became the blueprint of our lives. When Leo was elected student body president, my acceptance into a prestigious architecture program was met with a nod and a, "That's great, but have you seen the article about your brother in the local paper?" My college fund was modest, managed with practical frugality. Leo's was an open account, fueled by the belief that his potential was limitless and deserved every possible investment. The worst was my high school graduation. I was the valedictorian. I spent weeks writing a speech I hoped would finally make them see me. A speech about building bridges instead of walls, a subtle plea for connection. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, my heart pounding. I found my parents and Leo in the third row. My mother was whispering to my father, pointing at her watch. Leo was on his phone, scrolling. Halfway through my speech, I saw them stand up and slip out the side exit. I finished my address to a round of applause from strangers, but the only sound in my head was the click of the door closing behind my family. I found out later they had left to get to the restaurant early to celebrate Leo being named captain of the football team for the upcoming season. My academic honor was an inconvenient opening act for his athletic coronation. I didn't break. I adapted. I learned to find validation elsewhere, in the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly rendered blueprint, in the praise of a teacher, in the silent nod of a professor who saw the spark in my work. I became an observer, a student of quiet survival. I built my own world inside myself, a place where my worth wasn't measured against my brother's shine. Moving 3 hours away from my first job out of college wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of self-preservation. It was the first time I felt like I could finally breathe my own air. The city was a welcome anonymity. For the first time, I wasn't Leo's little brother. I was just Nicholas Sterling, a junior architect at a firm that valued precision and creativity over last names and social standing. My small apartment, with its tall windows and stacks of books, became my sanctuary. It was messy, it smelled like coffee and drafting paper, and it was entirely mine. And then I met Clara. She wasn't like anyone I had ever known. She was a lawyer, sharp and brilliant, with a laugh that could fill a room and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. We met through a mutual friend at a ridiculously hipster art gallery. I was trying to sound intelligent about a piece that looked like a pile of discarded metal, and she called me out on it with a playful grin. "It's okay to admit you don't get it," she'd said. I think the artist was just trying to see what they could get away with. I was floored by her directness, her lack of pretense. With Clara, there were no games, no hidden agendas. What you saw was what you got. And what I saw was someone who saw me. She didn't just hear my stories about my family. She understood the silence between the words. She saw the years of hurt I tried to brush off with a casual shrug. She was the one who pointed out that my habit of minimizing my own accomplishments was a defense mechanism I had learned in a house where my light was always deemed too dim. The real test, the moment I knew this was different, was meeting her parents. I was terrified. My experience with family dinner was a performance. A careful dance of avoiding conversational landmines and redirecting all praise towards Leo. I braced myself for the same. But the moment I walked into John and Maria's home, it was like stepping into a different reality. Their house was warm and lived in, filled with photos and the smell of roasting garlic. John, a retired history teacher, gave me a firm handshake and immediately started asking about the historical influences in the buildings I was designing. Maria, a nurse, hugged me like she'd known me for years and insisted I call her by her first name. Over dinner, they asked about my day. They wanted to know about the challenges of my latest project. When I mentioned a small award my firm had won for a community center I'd helped design, they didn't just nod. They stopped, they raised their glasses, and they toasted me. "To Nicholas," John said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. for making the world a more beautiful and functional place. I felt a lump form in my throat. It was such a simple gesture, but it was something I had craved my entire life. It was genuine recognition. It wasn't a comparison, it wasn't a competition. It was just celebration. After dinner, while Clara and I were doing the dishes, Maria came up behind me and put a hand on my arm. "You have a good heart, Nicholas," she said softly. "Clara is very happy. That's all that matters to us." I had to turn away to hide the fact that my eyes were welling up. This was family. It wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about showing up, paying attention, and making room for someone else's joy. It was in that small, warm kitchen, with the scent of garlic in the air and the quiet kindness of a near stranger, that I finally understood what I had been missing. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never settle for the cold, hollow imitation of family I had left behind. It was Clara who proposed to me, not in a grand public spectacle but in our own quiet way. We were on a weekend trip to the coast, walking along a foggy beach at dawn. The world was muted, just the sound of the waves and the cry of the gulls. She stopped, turned to me, and pulled a simple, beautifully designed ring from her pocket. It wasn't a diamond. It was a ring made from reclaimed wood and a thin band of titanium, something she knew I, as an architect, would appreciate. "Nicholas Sterling," she said, her voice steady despite the sea breeze. "You've rebuilt my idea of what a partnership can be. Will you build a life with me?" I said yes before she even finished the sentence. The wedding planning was a reflection of us. Simple, meaningful, and entirely our own. We didn't want the stress or the expense of a massive event like the one Leo was planning for September. His was going to be a 300-guest affair at a lavish country club, something my mother was orchestrating with military precision. Ours was going to be different. We chose a small, historic chapel on the coast, with room for only 50 people. We wanted a day surrounded by the people who had genuinely been a part of our story, the people who had shown up for us. And yet, a small, stubborn part of me still wanted my family there. It was an irrational hope, a deep-seated childhood yearning that refused to die. I wanted them to see me, just once, standing on my own, happy. I wanted them to witness the life I had built, the love I had found. I wanted them to choose me. So, I decided to make one last effort. I designed the invitations myself, a simple, elegant card with a sketch of the coastal chapel. I didn't want there to be any excuses, any lost in the mail stories that had conveniently plagued important documents of mine in the past. This time, I took no chances. I packaged each invitation, one for my parents, one for Leo and Amelia, and one for my Aunt Carol, in a sturdy priority mailbox. I walked into the post office and paid extra for a service that was probably overkill. Signature required upon delivery. I needed proof. I needed a paper trail that couldn't be denied or dismissed. As I filled out the forms, I could feel the familiar anxiety creeping in. I triple-checked the addresses, my own handwriting looking foreign under the harsh post office lights. For the next few days, I refreshed the tracking numbers on my phone like a nervous tick. I watched their journey across the state, my heart pounding a little faster with each update. Then, one by one, they all changed to delivered. And underneath each one, a digital confirmation. Signed for by L. Sterling. Leo. He had signed for all of them. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. It worked. They got them. There was no way to deny it. He signed for every single package. I let myself breathe. I let that tiny, stubborn hope bloom. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I imagined the phone call from my mom. Maybe a little surprised, maybe a little flustered, but congratulatory. I pictured a text from my dad, a simple looking forward to it. I even let myself imagine Leo calling, perhaps with a touch of his usual sarcasm, but acknowledging it nonetheless. I waited, and the silence that followed was louder than any argument we had ever had. Days turned into a week. My phone remained silent. The family group chat on WhatsApp, a space usually buzzing with my mother's updates about Leo's wedding planning or my father's golf scores, was quiet whenever I checked it. No calls. No texts. Not even a cursory congrats in the chat. Nothing. First, I made excuses for them. They were busy with Leo's wedding. It was a huge event, a massive undertaking. My mother was probably overwhelmed. My dad was probably just letting her handle it. Leo was Leo. He was probably too wrapped up in his own world to think about mine. Give them time, Clara said. Her voice gentle but with an edge of skepticism she tried to hide for my sake. People are weird about weddings. But as the second week bled into the third, the excuses wore thin, replaced by a cold, familiar ache in my chest. The silence was no longer passive, felt active, felt intentional, felt like a decision had been made. I decided to force the issue. I called my mother one Tuesday evening. It rang 4 times and went straight to voicemail. Her mailbox was full. It was always full. It was her preferred method of avoiding conversations she didn't want to have. I left no message. I texted my father. A simple, "Hey Dad, just wanted to make sure you guys got the package I sent a few weeks ago." An hour later, a reply popped up. "Things are crazy here with the wedding planning. I'll call you later." He never did. The real blow came a few days later. I opened WhatsApp to send a picture of a design I was proud of to the family chat, a habit I hadn't yet managed to break. I typed a message, hit send, and got an error notification. "You are not a member of this group." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. I checked the group info. My name, my number, they were just gone. I hadn't been removed with a dramatic "Nicholas has left the group" notification. I had been quietly, surgically excised. It was a digital erasure. It was as if I had never been there at all. I dropped my phone on the couch, my hands shaking. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a deliberate act of exclusion. They had received the invitations to my wedding, a celebration of the most important commitment of my life, and their response was to delete me. "Clara," I said, my voice barely a whisper when she walked into the room. She saw my face and was by my side in an instant. I didn't have to explain. I just showed her the phone. Her expression hardened. The gentle sympathy was gone, replaced by the sharp focus of the lawyer she was. "Okay," she said, her tone firm. "No more excuses. No more waiting. We need to know what happened." That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the same question echoing in the darkness. Why? Why would they go this far? It wasn't enough to ignore me. They had to pretend I didn't exist at all. A darker thought began to take root in my mind. Maybe they didn't just ignore the invitations. Maybe they made sure they were never seen in the first place. The signature on the delivery slips, L. Sterling, flashed in my mind. Leo. He had been the gatekeeper. He had received the packages. The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture so ugly and petty I could hardly stand to look at it. My wedding was in June. His was in September. Mine was small, intimate, and real. His was a massive production designed to be the social event of the year for their community. My quiet happiness was a potential spotlight stealer, an inconvenient prelude to his main event. And in my family, there was only ever room for 1 star. "There has to be a way to know for sure," I said to Clara the next morning over a breakfast neither of us was eating. "I can't just go on assuming. I need to know." Clara, ever the pragmatist, was already thinking several steps ahead. "There might be," she said, tapping her fingers on the table. "You all share that family email account, right? The one your mom set up years ago for bills and official family correspondence." I nodded. It was another one of my mother's tools for control, a central hub where she could monitor everything. I rarely used it, but I knew Leo and my parents did. "I have a friend," Clara continued. "Ben. He's an IT security expert, a digital forensics guy. If anyone can find out if that email was accessed and what happened to it, he's the one." She paused, her expression serious. "But Nick, you have to be sure you want to do this. Once you open this door, you can't close it. Are you prepared for what you might find?" Was I? Part of me wanted to let it go, to accept the hurt and move on, to focus on the beautiful life I was building with her. But the other part, the part that had been silenced for 30 years, needed an answer. It needed the truth, no matter how ugly. I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Clara made the call. Ben agreed to help. No questions asked. A testament to his friendship with Clara. That evening, he walked us through the process over a secure video call. It was surprisingly simple. Since I was technically one of the account holders, I had the right to request the access logs from the email provider. The process would take a day or two. While we waited, Clara had another idea. The post office, she said. They keep digital copies of signatures. Let's get the official images, not just the confirmation text. The next day, I went back to the post office, my stomach in knots. The clerk was helpful, and after a few minutes of typing, she turned the monitor towards me. There, on the screen, were 4 separate digital receipts, and on the signature line of each one was a familiar, arrogant scrawl. Leo Sterling. It wasn't just a quick L. Sterling. It was his full, looping signature, the one he used for important documents, the one he was so proud of. He had signed for my parents' invitation. He had signed for my aunt's invitation. He had signed for his own. He had systematically intercepted every single message I had sent. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't him grabbing the mail and forgetting. This was a calculated plan. He had made sure no one would even know I was getting married. The confirmation email from Ben arrived the following afternoon. The subject line was simple, "Got it." Attached was a log file that looked like gibberish to me, but Ben had highlighted the relevant lines in a follow-up email. Email from nicholas.sterling@email.com. Subject: You're invited. Received. April 23rd, 10:14 a.m. Action: Opened on device ID 7B4AC8F0, Leo Sterling's iPhone. Timestamp: April 23rd, 10:15 a.m. Action: Moved to trash. Timestamp: April 23rd, 10:15 a.m. Action: Permanently deleted. Timestamp: April 23rd, 10:16 a.m. It had all happened in under 2 minutes. He had received the notification, opened it, and erased it from existence. There it was in cold, hard digital text. The proof. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The ache in my chest was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. It was a clean, purifying rage. He hadn't just let me be ignored. He had orchestrated it. He had played God with my life, deciding who was allowed to know about my happiness. And my parents? Had they really not noticed? Had they really not wondered why they hadn't heard from me? Or was it easier for them to accept the silence, to not ask questions they didn't want the answers to? "What do you want to do?" Clara asked, her hand resting on my shoulder. I looked from the digital signature to the email log. The evidence was irrefutable. The lie was exposed. "Thanksgiving is in a few weeks," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. They always make a big deal out of it. Perfect family portrait. A grim smile touched my lips. "This year, I'm going to give them a Thanksgiving they'll never forget." Our wedding day was beautiful. It was everything we wanted it to be. The sun broke through the coastal fog just as the ceremony began, streaming through the stained glass windows of the little chapel. We were surrounded by 50 people who loved us. Clara's warm, boisterous family, our closest friends, even a few of my colleagues from the firm. But as I stood at the altar, looking at Clara, a shadow lingered at the edge of my heart. I scanned the pews out of a stupid, stubborn reflex, knowing what I would find. Emptiness. For empty seats in the front row that felt like a gaping wound. They didn't come. They didn't even call. We celebrated anyway. We danced, we laughed, we ate good food and drank champagne. John, Clara's father, gave a speech that made everyone cry, talking about how he knew I was the one for his daughter when he saw the way I looked at her. Like she was the only thing that made sense in the world. And in that moment, she was. But later that night, after the last guest had gone and we were alone in our hotel room overlooking the ocean, the weight of their absence crashed down on me. I tried to hide it, but Clara knew. "It's okay to be sad, Nick," she whispered, holding me. It's okay to be angry. And I was furious. I was heartbroken. How could they do this? How could they look at 30 years of shared history, of being a family, and decide it was worth nothing? How could a wedding, a symbol of joy and union, be met with such a cold, deliberate void? The weeks after the wedding were a strange kind of limbo. I had the proof of Leo's sabotage tucked away in a digital folder, a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. But I wasn't ready. The hurt was still too raw. I needed to let it settle, to let the anger solidify into resolve. I threw myself into my work. Our firm was in the running for a huge project, a new city library, and I was leading the design proposal. It was the biggest opportunity of my career, a chance to really make a name for myself. The long hours were a welcome distraction, a place to channel my frustration into something productive. My boss, Mr. Davenport, a stern but fair man who rarely gave out praise, started to notice. He'd stop by my desk, looking over my schematics with a critical eye, and give a rare, approving nod. It was a small thing, but it was a kernel of validation I desperately needed. Life with Clara was my anchor. It was the calm, steady center in the hurricane of my emotions. We were building a life together, a life based on respect, honesty, and showing up for each other. We were a team, and as Thanksgiving approached, we started to plan our strategy. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst. It was going to be a calm, methodical presentation of the facts. Clara, the lawyer, helped me organize the evidence into a clear, linear timeline. The delivery confirmations, the signatures, the email logs. We were preparing for a trial, and my family was about to be put on the stand. The week before Thanksgiving felt like the final, tense moments before a trial begins. Every evening, Clara and I would sit at our dining table, which had temporarily become our war room. We laid out the evidence not just to have it ready, but to steel ourselves for the confrontation ahead. They're going to deny it, Clara said one night, her lawyer brain kicking in. Your mom will defend Leo to her last breath. Your dad will try to play the peacemaker and shut the conversation down. Leo will lie with a straight face. You have to be prepared for that. I know, I said, scrolling through the digital images of Leo's signature. But they can't deny this. It's his handwriting. It's his phone ID on the email log. They'll try, she insisted. They'll say it's a misunderstanding, a technical glitch, anything to avoid the truth. You can't let them derail you. It was during this preparation that I stumbled upon the final piece of evidence, the one that would prove to be the most damning of all. I was looking through old text messages with Leo, trying to pinpoint the exact date I had first told him Clara and I were engaged. As I scrolled back through months of one-sided conversations, me sharing news, him responding with one-word answers or emojis, I came across a voice message he had sent me in late April, right after I'd told him. At the time, I had barely registered it. His tone was light, almost joking. I had listened to it once and dismissed it as typical Leo sarcasm. But now, with the knowledge of what he had done, the words took on a sinister new meaning. I pressed play, and Leo's smooth, confident voice filled the quiet room. Hey, little brother. Just got your text. Congrats. So, a wedding in June, huh? Cutting it a little close to my big event in September. Don't you think? He let out a low chuckle. Just a little friendly advice. Don't let your little shadow get in the way of my sunshine. You know how Mom gets about her big moments. Anyway, talk later. Clara and I looked at each other, our eyes wide. It was all there. The possessiveness over the big event. The condescending little brother. And the threat, veiled as it was. Don't let your shadow get in the way of my sunshine. He was telling me in no uncertain terms to stay in my place. My God, Clara whispered. It's a confession. At the time, I thought he was just being an ass. I said, my voice hollow. I thought he was making a joke about Mom being a bridezilla for his wedding. No, she said, her voice firm. He was telling you exactly what he was going to do. He was going to make sure your wedding stayed in the shadows so it wouldn't compete with his. I saved the audio file immediately, moving it into the evidence folder on the hard drive. It was the Conet Major, the piece that revealed not just his actions but his intent, his malice. This wasn't just about petty jealousy. It was about maintaining the family hierarchy, a system he had benefited from his entire life. My happiness was a threat to that system, so it had to be neutralized. And he had been arrogant enough to spell it out for me in his own voice. 2 days before Thanksgiving, my phone rang. The caller ID read, Aunt Carol. My mother's younger sister, Carol, had always played the part of the sweet, understanding aunt. She was the one who would slip me a $20 bill at Christmas and whisper, "Don't let your mother get to you." But I had learned over the years that her loyalty was always, ultimately, with her sister and her golden boy nephew. "Nicholas, dear," she chirped when I answered. "I was just calling to see if you and that lovely Clara were still planning on coming for Thanksgiving. Your mother is so looking forward to it." I knew immediately this wasn't a social call. This was reconnaissance. "We'll be there, Aunt Carol," I said, my tone neutral. "Oh, wonderful," she gushed. "It's just, you know how your mother gets. She wants everything to be perfect, especially after the stress of Leo and Amelia's beautiful wedding. We're all still walking on air from that." There it was, the subtle dig, the reminder of the event I wasn't a part of. "I'm sure," I said. She paused, and her voice dropped into a more conspiratorial tone. "Listen, honey, I know there's been some distance lately. Families are complicated things. Sometimes things get said or not said, and feelings get hurt. But Thanksgiving is a time for peace. A time to let bygones be bygones, you know? It's not the time or the place to dredge up old grievances." My grip on the phone tightened. This was a warning. My mother had clearly sensed something was wrong. My curt texts, my lack of communication, and she had dispatched her sister to do her dirty work, to preemptively shut down any confrontation I might be planning. They were trying to manage me, to control the narrative before I even had a chance to speak. "What grievances are you referring to, Aunt Carol?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. She stammered for a second, caught off guard. "Oh, just whatever might be bothering you. The important thing is family. We have to protect it. Leo is just starting his new life with Amelia, and your parents are so proud. We wouldn't want anything to spoil that happiness, would we?" The message was crystal clear. Leo's happiness is more important than your feelings. Do not rock the boat. "Thank you for the advice, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice cold. "I'll be sure to keep it in mind. We'll see you on Thursday." I hung up before she could say another word. The call hadn't deterred me. It had done the opposite. It had poured gasoline on the fire. It wasn't just Leo anymore. It was a conspiracy of silence, a family-wide agreement to protect the status quo at my expense. Carol's call had erased any last shred of doubt. They knew. On some level, they all knew something was wrong, and they had all chosen to look the other way. They weren't just a family with a favorite son. They were a system, a machine designed to protect its most valuable asset. And on Thursday, I was going to throw a wrench in the gears. We arrived at my parents' house at exactly 4 p.m. The moment we stepped through the door, the performance began. My mother rushed forward, enveloping me in a stiff, air-kiss embrace that smelled of hairspray. "Nicholas, you made it!" she exclaimed, her voice a little too bright. She gave Clara a polite, cool nod. The house was filled with guests. A few family friends, my aunt and uncle, and my cousin Sarah, who gave me a quick, nervous smile before looking away. And there, holding court by the fireplace, was Leo. He was telling some animated story, his fiancée Amelia hanging on his every word. He caught my eye and gave me a lazy, confident grin, as if nothing in the world was wrong. The arrogance was breathtaking. We took our seats at the dining table, and the script played out just as I knew it would. An endless parade of praise for Leo's promotion, Leo's new house, and, of course, Leo's perfect wedding. Not one person asked me about my life, my work, or my wife. Clara sat beside me, a quiet, solid presence. I could feel her hand resting on my knee under the table, a silent message of support. And then, just as I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times, my mother tapped her glass. "So, Nicholas," she said, her voice piercing the comfortable lull, When is yours? The moment had arrived. I executed my part of the script, just as planned. I already had mine, 6 months ago. You got invitations. The silence. The denial from my father. We never got them. This was it. I took a slow breath, reached into my jacket, and pulled out my phone, placing it deliberately on the table. The screen glowed, reflecting in the polished silverware. Every eye was locked on it. I figured you'd say that, I said, my voice steady. I swiped the screen open to a photo gallery I had prepared. This might refresh your memory. I turned the phone so the table could see. The first image was a high-resolution scan of the delivery receipt for the package addressed to my parents. At the bottom, in the signature box, was Leo's unmistakable, flourishing signature. My mother gasped a small, choked sound. My father leaned forward, squinting, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. That must be a mistake, my father stammered. Is it? I said, swiping to the next image. The receipt for Aunt Carol. Same signature. Swipe. The receipt for Leo and Amelia. Same signature. Swipe. The fourth one. Same signature. For packages, Dad. All delivered on April 23rd. All signed for by the same person. I looked directly at my brother. His confident smirk was gone, replaced by a stony mask. His knuckles were white where he gripped his napkin. Amelia was staring at him, a confused frown on her face. Leo? She said, her voice small. Did you sign for these? I don't remember, Leo said, his voice tight. I sign for packages all the time. The mailman just hands me a scanner. You don't remember signing for 4 priority boxes from your own brother? A few weeks after he told you he was engaged? I pressed, keeping my voice level. That seems like a very specific thing to forget. It's not my job to be your personal secretary, he snapped, the first crack in his composure. No, I agreed calmly. It's not. But it seems you took on the job of being my personal censor. I swiped to the next piece of evidence. It was a screenshot of the email log Ben had uncovered. I zoomed in on the highlighted lines. This, I said, my voice dropping slightly, is the activity log for the family email account. On April 23rd, at 10:15 a.m., the email with our wedding announcement was opened on a device identified as Leo Sterling's iPhone. 1 minute later, it was permanently deleted, before anyone else could have possibly seen it. My father's jaw tightened. Leo, what is this? It's a glitch, Leo insisted, his voice rising. Why are you attacking me? You come here on Thanksgiving and you attack me with these fake screenshots. Fake, I said, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. These are server logs, Leo. They're about as real as it gets. Just like your signature. My mother finally found her voice, her tone pleading. Nicholas, stop it. Why would Leo do something like that? It makes no sense. He wouldn't sabotage his own brother's wedding. He loves you. The absurdity of that statement, he loves you, almost made me laugh again. I looked at her, at the willful blindness in her eyes, the desperate need to maintain the fantasy of her perfect family. And I knew the paper evidence wasn't enough. They would find a way to deny it, to explain it away. It was time for the final, irrefutable proof. You're right, Mom, I said, my voice softening, drawing them in. It does sound crazy. Why would he do it? Maybe he can tell us himself. Leo's eyes narrowed. He thought I was bluffing, that I had run out of ammunition. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest in a show of defiance. I'm not telling you anything because there's nothing to tell. Okay, I said, picked up my phone again. Then let's listen. I navigated to the audio file and turned the volume all the way up. I held the phone in the center of the table. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then I pressed play. Leo's smooth, confident voice filled the dining room, echoing off the crystal glasses. Hey, little brother, just got your text. Congrats. So, a wedding in June, huh? Cutting it a little close to my big event in September. Don't you think? A collective intake of breath went around the table. Amelia's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face went pale. The recording continued, Leo's smug chuckle sounding monstrous in the tense silence. Just a little friendly advice. Don't let your little shadow get in the way of my sunshine. You know how Mom gets about her big moments. Anyway, talk later. The message ended. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. It was the silence of exposure. The silence of a truth so ugly it couldn't be ignored or explained away. It was his voice, his words, his intent, laid bare for everyone to hear. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared, first at the phone, then at Leo. His mask of composure had shattered. His face was a mixture of shock and pure, undiluted rage. He was trapped, cornered by his own arrogance. Amelia was the first to speak, her voice a trembling whisper. Leo, what was that? He didn't answer her. His eyes were locked on me, blazing with a hatred so intense it was almost physical. You recorded me? He hissed, his voice low and venomous. You sent me a voice message, you idiot. I shot back, the calm finally breaking. You left the evidence yourself. And then he broke. It wasn't a confession born of remorse. It was an explosion of pure, vitriolic resentment that had been festering for years. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. So what if I did? He roared, his voice shaking with fury. You think you can just waltz in here with your perfect little life, your quiet little wedding, and steal my thunder? My whole life I've had to be the one with the grades, the one with the promotion, the one who made them proud. I had to carry the weight of this whole family's expectations. He gestured wildly at our parents. Do you have any idea what that's like? The pressure? While you got to hide away in another city, playing with your little blueprints, getting everything so easily. I choked out, a laugh of pure disbelief bubbling up. You think any of this was easy for me? Yes, he screamed, his face contorted. You never had to be anything. You could just exist, and everyone felt sorry for you. Poor Nicholas, always in Leo's shadow. You loved it. You weaponized it. Your quietness wasn't humility. It was a judgment on all of us. Your wedding wasn't about love. It was a statement, a way to make my wedding, our family's biggest moment, seem shallow and meaningless. That is insane, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and pity. Is it? He sneered. I wasn't going to let you do it. I wasn't going to let you ruin my year. My wedding was in September. It deserved its own season. Your little sideshow in June was an inconvenience, so I took care of it. I did what I had to do to protect this family, to protect my wedding from your passive-aggressive little power play. The room was stunned into silence. It was a full confession, more damning than I could have ever imagined. He wasn't sorry. He was proud. He believed he was justified. He had admitted everything, not just the act, but the twisted, jealous motive behind it. He had shown everyone the monster hiding behind the mask of the golden child. The truth was finally out, and it was uglier and more pathetic than I had ever dreamed. This was the moment that changed everything, the moment I finally took back control of my own story. Thank you for sticking with me this far. You are amazing. Please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, just so I know you've been on this journey with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest reason I can keep sharing the rest of my journey. The echoes of Leo's tirade hung in the air like toxic smoke. He stood there, breathing heavily, his chest heaving. The triumphant confession had drained him, leaving behind a raw, ugly reality. My mother was the first to move. She rose slowly, her face a mask of bewildered pain, and went to Leo's side. Leo, sweetheart, sit down, she whispered, putting a hand on his arm. You're not yourself. You don't mean that. Oh, he means it, I said, my voice cutting through her denial. I looked at her, at the automatic way she went to comfort the son who had just confessed to a monstrous betrayal, and something inside me finally, irrevocably, broke. It was the last thread of hope I had that she might, for once, choose fairness over favoritism. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Nicholas, son, we didn't know. I swear to you, if we had known, we would have been there. We would have." His voice trailed off, helpless. "You would have what, Dad?" I asked, my voice devoid of heat, filled only with a weary clarity. "You would have come? After years of missing every other milestone? After forgetting birthdays, after leaving my graduation early? Your ignorance isn't an excuse. It's a choice. You chose not to see because it was easier than dealing with the truth of your family." He flinched as if I'd slapped him, and for the first time he had no answer. Amelia had backed away from Leo, her face pale with shock and disgust. She looked at the man she was supposed to spend her life with as if seeing him for the first time. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The room felt small, suffocating. "I didn't come here for an apology," I said, my gaze sweeping over each of them. My deluded mother, my weak father, my pathetic, jealous brother. Because an apology wouldn't mean anything. I came here for the truth. Not for you, but for me. So I could stop wondering if I was crazy, if I had imagined it all. I looked at my parents. For 30 years, you built this system. A system where he was the sun and I was the shadow. A system where his ambition was celebrated and my happiness was an inconvenience. You didn't just create a golden child. You created a monster. And you enabled him every step of the way. My mother started to cry, silent tears tracking through her makeup. "That's not true. We love you both. We did our best." "No," I said, the word sharp and final. "You did your best for him. For me, you did the bare minimum and called it fairness. Well, I'm done. I'm done begging for a place at this table. I'm done shrinking myself to make him feel big. I'm done accepting your silence as anything other than complicity." Clara stood up and came to my side, slipping her hand into mine. Her presence was a silent affirmation of everything I was saying. "Tonight, I'm not losing a family," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I'm just finally admitting to myself that I never really had one." I turned and walked towards the door, Clara right with me. "Nicholas, wait!" my father called out, his voice desperate. "Don't go. We can fix this." I paused at the door but didn't turn around. "You can't fix what you refuse to see," I said. Then I added one last thing, for them and for me. "You didn't miss my wedding. You chose not to see it." And with that, we stepped out into the cold November night, closing the door softly behind us. There was no slam, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet, firm click of a lock falling into place, sealing off a part of my life forever. The silence that followed belonged to me. The drive home was silent. I stared out the passenger window, watching the streetlights blur into streaks of gold. The rage had subsided, leaving a strange, hollow calm in its wake. It wasn't the triumphant feeling I had expected. It was heavier, more complex. It felt like the quiet exhaustion after a long, painful surgery. The poison was out, but the wound was still fresh. Clara drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the center console, close enough for me to take if I wanted to. She didn't press me with questions. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just gave me the space to process, to breathe in the silence. When we got back to our apartment, the warmth and quiet felt like a sanctuary. I walked over to the large window in our living room and looked out at the city lights. It was a life I had built, a world away from that suffocating dining room. "Are you okay?" Clara finally asked, her voice soft from behind me. I turned to face her. "I don't know what I am," I admitted. "I thought I would feel victorious, vindicated, but I just feel empty." She came and wrapped her arms around me, and I leaned into her, resting my head on her shoulder. The shaking started then, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that came from a place of 30 years of repressed hurt. I wasn't just crying for the stolen wedding invitation. I was crying for the 10-year-old boy at the science fair, for the high school valedictorian speaking to an empty chair, for every moment I had felt invisible. Clara just held me, her hold firm and steady, an anchor in my storm. It's grief, Nick, she whispered into my hair. You're grieving the family you deserved but never had. It's okay. Let it out. And I did. I let out all the pain and anger and disappointment I had swallowed for a lifetime. Later, as we lay in bed, the storm inside me finally quiet, I turned to her in the darkness. Thank you, I said, for everything, for pushing me to find the truth, for standing by me tonight. Always, she said, her voice thick with sleep. You're not in the shadow anymore, Nick. I see you. I've always seen you. Her words were a balm on the raw wound in my soul. The confrontation hadn't been about revenge. I realized that now. It wasn't about making them pay. It was about severing the cord of hope that had kept me tied to their dysfunction for so long. It was about choosing myself, my own peace, my own family. My family with her. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something I had to fight for. It felt like something we were building together, on a foundation of truth and a love that didn't require me to be anything other than exactly who I was. The 6 months that followed Thanksgiving were a period of reconstruction, both personally and professionally. The silence from my family was absolute, a void that was, for the first time, a relief rather than a source of pain. I didn't reach out, and neither did they. I channeled all that newly freed energy into my work. The city library project was all-consuming. It was the most challenging and rewarding design of my life. I poured everything I had into it, the late nights, the early mornings, the obsessive attention to detail. I wasn't just designing a building. I was creating a space for a community, a place for quiet learning and loud inspiration. It was everything my childhood home was not. Mr. Davenport, my boss, saw the dedication. He started including me in high-level client meetings. He'd introduce me not as a junior architect, but as Nicholas Sterling, the lead designer on the library project. The respect in his voice was something I had never heard from my own father. It was earned, not given, and it meant the world to me. One Monday morning, he called me into his office, the big corner room I had always found so intimidating. Sterling, he said, getting straight to the point in his usual gruff manner. The library committee made their decision this morning. They loved the design. They called it visionary. He paused, letting the words sink in. We got the contract. I felt a surge of adrenaline, of pure joy. That's incredible news, sir. It is, he said, a rare smile touching his lips. And that's not all. The board and I have been discussing this for a while. Your work on this proposal was exemplary. Effective immediately, we're offering you a promotion to senior architect. I was speechless. Promotion. It came with a significant salary increase, more responsibility, and a leading role in the firm's future projects. It was everything I had been working towards. I don't know what to say, Mr. Davenport, I managed. Say you'll accept, he said. You've earned this, Nicholas. Your work speaks for itself. I walked out of his office in a daze, the world feeling brighter, sharper. I called Clara immediately, and her shriek of happiness on the other end of the line was the only celebration I needed. That evening, as Clara and I were looking at listings for houses, a real house with a yard, something my new salary could finally make possible, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello, Nicholas. The voice was hesitant, gravelly. It was my father. I was silent for a moment, my whole body tensing. I know it's been a while, he stammered. I needed to call. I've been doing a lot of thinking. He took a shaky breath. Your mother and we're in counseling. It's hard. I still said nothing. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. That's not why I called, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. I was cleaning out the garage last weekend, going through some old boxes, and I found something. He paused. It was one of your wedding invitations. The box was sealed. It had been tucked away in Leo's old closet, under a pile of his college sweatshirts. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was just as you said, he whispered, and I could hear the shame in his voice. He hid it. He hid them all. Seeing it there, so pristine, It made it real in a way that night couldn't. Holding the proof in my hands, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'm so sorry, son. I'm sorry I was blind. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. I failed you. And I'm so sorry." It was the first real apology I had ever received from him. It wasn't an excuse. It was an admission. It didn't erase 30 years of pain, but it was a start. A crack of light in a long-closed door. "Thank you for telling me, Dad," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I appreciate the call." It was all I could offer him for now, but for the first time in a long time it felt like it might one day be enough. A week after my father's call, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. The return address was my parents' house, but the handwriting was my mother's elegant, looping script. My stomach twisted. I almost threw it away unopened, but Clara convinced me to at least see what it said. "Closure works in both directions," she'd reminded me. I slid it open. It was a 3-page letter. It started with an "I'm sorry your feelings were hurt," the classic non-apology of someone who refuses to take responsibility. The rest of the letter wasn't about me at all. It was a long, rambling defense of Leo. She wrote about the immense pressure he had always been under, how his desire for a perfect wedding was understandable, how my springing my own wedding on them had been unsettling for him during a stressful time. She painted him as the victim of his own high standards and me as an insensitive disruptor. She ended the letter by saying she hoped that, in time, I would find it in my heart to forgive my brother so the family could heal. There was no acknowledgement of the lies, the sabotage, or the malice. It was a masterclass in denial, a desperate attempt to rewrite history and recenter the narrative around her golden child. I read it once, then read it again to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting the sheer audacity of it. Then I walked to the kitchen, tore the 3 pages into small, satisfying pieces, and dropped them into the recycling bin. There was no anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of finality. My father was trying, in his own fumbling way, to take a step forward. My mother was determined to stay chained to the same toxic dynamic forever. I finally accepted that I couldn't save her from herself. I couldn't make her see, and I didn't have to. A few weeks later, I heard through the grapevine of my cousin Sarah, who had called me, guilt-ridden, to apologize for her silence at Thanksgiving, that Leo and Amelia's engagement was off. Apparently, after the scene I had caused, Amelia started seeing Leo's charm as manipulation and his confidence as crippling narcissism. The voice message had been the final straw for her. She couldn't unhear the cruelty in his voice. She gave him back the ring and walked away. My mother was reportedly devastated, blaming me for ruining Leo's life. I felt a brief, grim satisfaction, but it was fleeting. His downfall didn't bring me joy. My freedom did. My freedom was the feeling of signing the mortgage papers for a house with Clara, a beautiful mid-century modern with a small yard and a studio space for me. It was the feeling of hosting our first barbecue, our lawn filled not with the tense energy of obligatory family gatherings, but with the easy laughter of our chosen family, Clara's parents, our friends, my colleagues. Mr. Davenport came, a rare social appearance for him. He stood with me on the newly built deck, a beer in his hand, looking at the library blueprints I had pinned up in my studio. "You're building a legacy, Nicholas," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Not with bricks and mortar, but with integrity. Don't ever forget that." I looked around at the life I had built. At Clara, laughing with her mother. At our friends playing lawn games. At the warm, happy chaos of it all. He was right. This was my legacy. Not the one I was born into, but the one I had designed and built myself, from the ground up on a foundation of truth. And it was stronger than any stone. It's been 2 years since that Thanksgiving. Life is good. It's quiet in a way I never knew was possible. The house is our sanctuary. My studio is filled with light and the scent of fresh blueprints. The library I designed is almost complete, a beacon of glass and steel that will stand long after I'm gone. My father and I are slowly, carefully building something new. He calls every Sunday. We don't talk about the past much. Instead, he asks about my work, about Clara, about the new dog we adopted. He's learning to be present, to listen, He came to visit last month by himself. When he stepped into our house, he looked around at the photos on our wall, of our wedding, of our friends, of our life, and he just nodded, his eyes misty. "This is a good place, son," he said. "You built a good life." It was perhaps the highest praise he had ever given me. I haven't spoken to my mother or Leo since that day. I don't harbor any hatred for them anymore. That would require too much of my energy. They exist in a world I no longer inhabit, a world of carefully constructed images and hollow victories. I wish them peace, but I wish it for them from a great distance. My peace is here, in this home, with my wife, with the family we have chosen. Sometimes, when I'm standing on the construction site of the library, watching the massive cranes lift steel beams into place, I think about the foundations of things. For years, I believed my foundation was my family, the one I was born into. I thought it was cracked and unstable, but that I had to keep trying to patch it, to hold it together. But I was wrong. My foundation wasn't them. It was me. It was the quiet resilience I learned in the shadows, the integrity I clung to when no one was watching, the courage to finally demand the truth. Family, I've learned, isn't about the blood you share. It's about the people who show up. It's about the people who see you, who celebrate you, who hold you accountable, and who love you not despite your flaws, but because of your strength. It's about the people who help you lay a new foundation, one built on trust and respect, and then help you build a life upon it. I look over at Clara, who often brings me lunch at the site. She's sketching in her notepad, the sun catching the silver streaks in her hair. She looks up and smiles, and in that smile I see my whole world, my home, my true north, my foundation, and it is unshakable. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It took a long time for me to get here, and sharing it isn't easy, but it feels necessary. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between the family you were given and the peace you deserved? I'd be honored to read about your experience. Please, share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Your support truly means the world.